Hey folks, I'm Anton, co-founder and CEO of Keyboard Cat Studios. And today I would like to talk about teams and why they are important to success in game development. There's an old adage, ideas are cheap, and that is for a very good reason. If you talk to almost anybody, they can generate a lot of ideas, whether good or bad. But there are very few teams that can actually make those ideas into reality. Once upon a time, the late 80s, early 90s, solo game development was somewhat of a reality. If you don't count access to actual hardware and software to develop games, you could encounter people at Atari or early Nintendo that did all the jobs required to make a game a reality back then. Both design, programming, and to some degree hardware engineering. This has not been true for a very long time now, and mostly because each discipline has become so much more complicated than it used to be. I am originally network and online service programmer by trade. So when I decided to found this company, I knew for sure that I am missing so many skill sets that it was not even a conversation whether I can do it alone or not. Pretty much the first thing I did was reach out to some of my friends and colleagues and get their opinions and try to get them on board. You can still find few games done by one or two people. They're generally few and far between. The most famous example out of recent years would probably be Stardew Valley. Um, but with all respect for the game itself, the development process was probably more luck than something repeatable. Eric Barone, the author of the game, worked for 5 years on his own, got lucky enough to be picked up by a publisher, and the publisher helped to get it over the finishing line. Um, Generally, it's a really, really good example of survivorship bias. You never heard of hundreds of people that went through the same exact journey and never made it. It's not a repeatable business strategy, and I would really, really not recommend doing this if you want to make a living out of game development. There are some other benefits of having partners beyond just plugging gaps in your skill set. And they're somewhat not unique to game development. First of all, everybody has biases and blind spots, and if you have a healthy relationship with your partners and teammates, they're going to help you fill those blind spots. And this is very, very important to not come to a situation where you have invested a lot of time under false assumptions. Second of all, with every long enterprise, there comes a fatigue. Um, there are gonna be weeks where you're gonna be jazzed to do things. There are gonna be weeks where you will find it hard to concentrate and do anything. And people in the team can be either motivators to do something because you have a social obligation, or they can pick up some slack while you bounce back. third is social connections, connections that can help you solve problems. For example, I did not have a lot of friends in art circles, and my other co-founders helped a lot in searching for a concept artist for us. Generally, the wider your social circle is, the better, because it's a source of people you can work with, people you can ask for help, people you can consult with, that sort of thing. The last thing is something later down the line and something that's not as glamorous. If you have a team and if you have a proven track record of shipping either games or projects or parts of games, you can pick up work for hire from publishers and other bigger studios. Often mid to large size studios that do not have extensive in-publisher infrastructure will look for smaller teams to pick up outsourcing work that they cannot do themselves. And that's a good revenue source to hold you over while you are working on your next title, or if you've had a bit of a slump on your just shipped project. So, what competencies, what expertise do you actually need to ship a game? I'm gonna try to go through the mind map that I know. Disclaimer, this is my personal anecdotal knowledge. You might have a different outlook based on your personal experience. Some positions may be called differently, some positions may be merged, that sort of stuff. Also, I have never worked at an executive position before, so some things I'm still learning as I go. If you want to have a look from a person who has more prior experience, you can look up Mark Darrah on YouTube. I'm gonna link his channel below. That guy knows more than I ever will about shipping games in AAA, probably. It is worth mentioning that you don't actually always need to fill in every expertise. Sometimes you can make design choices that will let you either minimize or exclude involvement of some skill sets. And that's a very important thing in indie in particular, where you're trying to play to your strength. For example, out of the four of us, what we have is we have a talented gameplay programmer, we have a very, very experienced level designer with a hobby background in 3D art. We have a systems and a narrative designer with extensive background in marketing. And I have extensive background in creating online services and maintaining them, which will allow us to capitalize on some things and steer us away from others. For example, we're probably not going to be able to do an exciting and fresh soundtrack. And we're probably not going to be able to do very detailed pixel art style graphics because we are outsourcing our concept art. The core of every game is art, and you're gonna start with concept art. We don't have a concept artist in house, so we're going to outsource this part to one of our friends. Um, and out of the concept art, you're gonna create your 2D or 3D art assets. In our case, we opted for a rather simplistic 3D look to avoid heavy texturing work or drawing out sprites. Um, this also ties with animations. If you're doing something like a fighting game or a third person shooter, you're likely going to be pretty heavy on the animations. We opted to minimize or avoid this particular part. The more elaborate you go on your visual style, the more subdivisions there are in the pipeline. You can specialize and subdivide in character art, lighting art, prop art, etc., etc. On the boundary between art and programming, there is an interesting specialization called technical art. These are the people that will make sure that all the assets produced by artists actually fit into the performance budgets of the game. In our case, we rely on our level designer partner to deal with this, since he has a background in dealing with performance limitations of the art pipeline. But we can also draw upon some of our ex-colleagues and friends to give some consultations. In terms of programming, you're generally looking at general purpose gameplay programming in every game, and that is covered by our in-house gameplay programmer, as well as graphics programming to some degree. Luckily, with modern game engines, graphics programming is not as intensive as it used to be. This is mostly making sure that the pipelines are set up in a way where you can realize artistic intent. It is highly unlikely that we will touch something that does not come out of the box with Unreal Engine that we're using. An underappreciated but very important discipline is tools programming. All those little tools that save time for artists, designers, programmers, that help us reduce the amount of bugs. Over the course of the project, they save conservatively months of effort. Just like with art, there are disciplines that are relevant for very particular feature sets or types of games. Things like AI, networking, backend, and online services. We generally try to minimize or eliminate all of them, because anytime, for example, you make your game multiplayer, you are exponentially increasing your development complexity, and this is not something that you want to do on the budget. Design is this third major pillar, and generally here you are split between narrative designers. Those are the folks that's gonna frame why your game is like it is and what happens. You have system designers. They generally deal with numbers, economy, abilities, pacing, things like that. And level designers, they make sure that environments that your player is in, they provide a nicely paced experience. Again, based on your particular genre or particular feature sets, there are subdivisions. For example, 3C designers is something very popular for action games. Monetization designers, if you're free to play a game, you'll probably have one of those. We have a person that is experienced with systems and narrative design, and we have a very experienced level designer. So on design front, we are actually pretty well stocked. And then there are things that don't always make it to the headlines, but they are still important. For example, infrastructure. You need to have somebody who's going to deal with hardware and software for all of your employees or partners. You need version control for your builds. You need build pipelines to actually build your game to upload it to Steam. You need backups because a week before you want to release your game, your server with your version control is gonna die, and that is not a fun experience. Luckily, I have pretty extensive experience with pretty much all of this, so this is not a problem for us per se. But out of the people in your team, you should have somebody that is comfortable with setting up your infrastructure. QA are unsung heroes of game development. Those are the people who make sure that you don't release a buggy mess. Unfortunately, in indie, there are not really in the budget, so we are stuck mostly with self QA. Separate mention for UI and UX. UI art and UX design are separate things that need to be taken care of. Fortunately, designers can somewhat deal with UX design, and UI art is something that we want to outsource. In terms of platform adaptation and accessibility, we are foregoing this for the moment. Audio. UI sounds is something that can be bought from asset packs if those work for you. More comprehensive audio like soundtrack, themes, bytes, those kinds of things, those are likely candidates for outsourcing. There is also a legal department that you will need to take care of in some way, shape, or form. You're going to need to form your LLC, you're going to need to deal with licensing for all of your software and for your engines and for whatever content packs you're using. You're going to need to deal with your IP, you're going to register your trademarks, you're going to need to file taxes, you're going to need to deal with outsourcing contracts, and you're going to need to deal with payrolls if you have employees. And last but not least, marketing. Community forming and management is really important for indies. This is to a degree what I'm doing right now. Ads, most indies do not have budgets for ads per se. You are more likely to be doing influencer outreach, which is basically contacting whatever influencers you might know, or just flat out emailing to all of them. This is, in general, marketing is something where a publisher can help you out if you choose to sign up with one. I hope you found this somewhat interesting or educational. If I have missed something, please let me know down in the comments. And also feel free to offer suggestions or tell me what you think about the format in general. See you in the next video.